Sally Honeycheck and her sister Lorraine had spent all their lives in Detroit. At 80 years old, Sally had seen the neighbourhood they lived in, Poletown, keep evolving over the years. Poletown is on the east side of the city, and as is pretty obvious once you find out, it's named after the Polish residents who initially started a community there in the early 19th century. The two sisters lived in the same house that they grew up in, the one their parents had bought in 1951, right before Sally was born. Sally and Lorraine, although they had no partners, did have a dog named Jack, so the three of them kept each other company, kept each other safe. The house had 6 stained glass windows, through which the Honeycheck family saw history unfold on their street, and so Sally and Lorraine stayed in the house as the seasons of life kept bringing change. They saw the car industry that Detroit was famous for moving slowly away from the centre, taking with it jobs and communities. Behind were left empty shopfronts and increasing poverty. From 1950 to 1960, roughly 20% of Detroit's population was lost. Police brutality and profiling amongst the city's minority residents was also endemic. Social unrest was growing. Even though it was now a century after emancipation, and slow shifts were happening from the civil rights movements in the 1950s and 1960s, many citizens still weren't being given equal rights. Sally was 30 years old when the Detroit riots started in the hot summer of 1967. It was a response to the ever-increasing tension caused by a city moving closer and closer because of discrimination and institutionalized maltreatment of certain people. The riot began on 12th Street, where an unlicensed after-hours club was raided by the police in the early hours of Sunday morning. A party was being held there for veterans. This included 2 minority soldiers who had recently returned from the Vietnam War. People were understandably reluctant to move the celebrations into the sticky streets, after spending the preceding hours enjoying the cool of the air conditioning inside. However, the orders were made by the police. This caused protests and police blockades. The situation quickly and dramatically escalated over the next 5 days. The Michigan National Guard and US Army, as well as state police, were called in to quell what became one of the biggest civil uprisings in 20th century America. 43 people lost their lives and hundreds more were injured. Sally saw how the riot became a slow turning point for the city. Activism grew in response to police violence. She would have seen her community and the nation changing around her. In 1974, the first person of colour was elected as mayor to run the city, serving until 1994. And as Sally grew older under the mayor's leadership, she continued to stay in her own small community and in her childhood home. She attended church weekly and enjoyed seeing familiar faces in the congregation, and they enjoyed seeing her. In her middle age, Sally would become engaged to a man named Dennis, but it wasn't to be. Her partner moved to New York and the relationship broke down, and Sally never married. She worked all of her life as an insurance adjuster, finally retiring in 2009. As a person, she loved putting together different outfits, her interest in fashion helping her pick between clothes that she collected over the years, amounting to a huge collection. Even when Sally simply went out to pick up groceries, people would notice how her earrings matched her necklace, how her hair was styled perfectly in place, and how her eyebrows were dyed to match her hair. The way Sally appeared in public was so meticulous that no one thought anything other than this must be exactly how she was at home too. Clean, organised, and beautifully presented. The outside of her house that she shared with her sister, for those that passed by, was also pretty neat too. The lawn was mowed and the flowers in the front garden clipped. It looked like an almost picture-perfect home. People walking past, people in the neighbourhood, people in Sally's life, often thought how much they'd like to see inside the home. It was assumed by different people that the owner must invite friends and family over regularly, but the reality was very different. After Sally and Lorraine's parents passed and they took on the house together, no one was ever invited in to come and visit. Not for birthdays, not for Christmas, not for Thanksgiving, not even as social gatherings to watch games where the Tigers were playing, Sally's favourite team. The sister's cousin Linda saw her monthly, mostly at church dinners. Sally continued to turn up reliably, with her cousin always commenting on her outfit, or how her nails had been recently done. Linda could never have guessed what was happening, hidden behind the always freshly painted and well-kept front door. That how Sally appeared in public was so different to how she was inside. It may have taken much longer for Sally's cousin to find out something else was going on. That is, if Sally had called her on Thanksgiving in 2019. Sally usually reliably called over the holidays, so slightly concerned, Linda tried calling her, but there was no answer. Panicked, she contacted the police to ask them to do a welfare check at the house. Linda also phoned around the local hospitals to see if something may have happened, and that is when she found that a Honeycheck was in hospital after a stroke. But it wasn't Sally, it was her sister Lorraine. The police visited the house as Linda requested. When they knocked on the door, there was still no answer. And even when they tried again later that day, still nothing. Linda met the police at the house and begged them to knock down the door, hoping to check that Sally was okay. She can only imagine how quiet and lonely it must have been not having her sister at home with her. She now worried deeply for her beloved cousin. The police said there wasn't enough evidence to warrant a break-in to the house. No shots or screams had been heard from inside the home, and no one's life appeared to be in danger. There was really nothing to suggest that something was wrong, but Linda understandably was still very worried. She had that gut feeling that is impossible to ignore. When Linda visited Lorraine in hospital just 2 days later, she found out that in fact both sisters had been taken into the facility. Although Sally had been the one to call 911, when the ambulance came for Lorraine, the crew saw the inside of the house, how the sisters had been living, and they called a second ambulance for Sally. Linda wondered why Sally would need to be taken to hospital, simply because paramedics had seen the inside of the house. Surely the inside of the house was neatly kept and maintained, just like the outside, just like Sally. Where is Sally now then? Linda asked the staff, and they told her she'd checked out on November the 12th so she could feed her dog. So now over 2 weeks had passed and nobody had heard from Sally. On the 29th of November, a few days after Thanksgiving weekend, Linda was almost at breaking point with worry. The police would not register Sally as missing, and so Linda told the police, "I'm breaking in instead." Accompanied by a friend who was an ex-police officer, Linda headed to the house on December the 1st. Giving it one more try, Linda knocked again on the door, but like all the other times, she got no answer. So instead, she went to the back of the home. There was an outside door to a cellar, but it was padlocked shut. Using bolt cutters, Linda prized it open wide enough to climb inside. Nothing could have prepared her for the smell that struck her nostrils. It was almost like trash that had been left out too long in the street in the sweltering summer heat. Upon entering, she also struggled to open the door fully. It was being blocked by something behind it. Linda tentatively stepped in. "Sally," she called. No answer. The smell was even stronger now she was deeper inside the home. She started gagging, pulling her sweater up to cover her mouth. The house was strangely dark. All around her were boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. She wondered what could be in them. Now moving up the stairs from the basement, she first reached the kitchen. There was waste and trash 12 inches deep, and the cupboards were stuffed so full that the doors had burst open. The counters were piled high with what looked like old takeaway boxes, collections of tickets, receipts and leaflets. The bed was too full of stuff to be slept in, and there was nowhere to sit, not even on the sofa or the chairs in the living room, because the clutter was piled high on them too. No one had seen, nor could they have guessed the extent of how bad things had become. The smell in the kitchen, however, was the worst so far in the house, although that would probably make sense, rotting food everywhere. Linda was shocked. She could barely breathe, stifled by the thick air. As she turned to look around the room for signs of where Sally was, Linda jumped at what she thought she saw. a human skeleton. However, she convinced herself that this was just a Halloween decoration. The skeleton was slumped over the kitchen table with a red sweater pulled over it. Linda wondered what kind of sick person would break into Sally's house to play this prank. It was bizarre, confusing, and most of all, concerning. She wondered too how Sally and her sister had been living like this, trapped in this life for years and years, surrounded by filth and mess. None of this made any sense. Linda crept out of the room to explore the rest of the house. She struggled to believe exactly what she was seeing. She could hardly walk through the home because of how deep the clutter was. Every door she opened to every room was the same. Linda could see small pathways that Sally and her sister must have created over time so that they could still move around the house to some degree. But these were tiny and narrow, and on either side were layers and layers of things that Linda couldn't even begin to properly identify. As she walked through the home, she could hear the scurrying of tiny feet, and she felt queasy. The place was infested with rats, but she still had no answer to her question. Where was Sally? Linda called her name louder and louder with no answer still. Defeated, she went back outside, just as the police were arriving. "Have you found her?" they asked. Linda answered, "No." But there was that Halloween prank that someone had played in the kitchen. That was surely worth mentioning to authorities. It seemed like someone could have broken in and done this, and that needed investigating. She told the police what she'd seen, and so together they made their way back into the kitchen, back to the skeleton at the table. Keeping her sweater pulled up over her mouth, Linda edged closer to the table. The skeleton was sitting in a blue lawn chair, the colour of which though had faded because of all the dirt and debris that covered it, and what the police said next was almost unbelievable. "This is her, Linda," the police whispered. "The dog has been eating her." Linda's vision started to blur. The police held her up on either side so that they could remove her from the situation. The cold December air felt so fresh compared to the dense atmosphere inside the house. Linda tried to process what she'd just seen. She felt too shocked to even cry. The doting cousin tried to make sense of how the sisters had lived in such squalor and how they ended up like this. She read about how hoarding is a disorder. Some people can't let go of possessions, and this eventually interferes with their ability to live normally. She saw with her own eyes how this could happen in the once loved home. Linda felt overwhelmed. As well as having to make sure that Sally's sister was safe, she now needed to sort through the house to take care of Sally's affairs. So week after week, she turned up at the house to sift through the rubbish with a friend. For their own safety, they both had to wear hazmat suits. They could only safely be in the house for 20 minutes at a time. That is how hazardous the house had become. Together, the two friends tried to go through decades of debris and hoarding. It was almost impossible to find the things that they needed. The valuables, the keepsakes, the insurance forms and money. Everything was mixed together with the trash that packed the home. The confusing mass was made of empty pizza boxes, unopened Avon items and receipts, and everything was covered in rat feces. Linda found old pictures of the house from before, when it was still a normal family home, and then as a stark reminder of what she had witnessed, the post-mortem results came back. It confirmed what Linda already knew, what she had witnessed with her own eyes. There had been extensive post-mortem animal consumption of Sally. This was by Jack the dog, as well as rats. Reading this, Linda was finally able to cry. She realised just how ill Sally had been, how much her mental health had deteriorated. Linda and her friend finally cleared the house and restored it to how it was originally. The insidious smell that had seemed to soak into even the very walls of the property finally dissipated following deep clean after deep clean. On the day the house went up for sale, Linda looked through one of the stained glass windows, the very same that Sally and her sister had looked through, as Detroit's history unfolded in front of them. She saw lilacs growing in the bushes outside. Carefully, she went out to cut a handful. She took them back into the kitchen, a space which now looked like a different room from when she'd first discovered Sally's body in there. She pulled a vase from the cupboards, now otherwise empty. They were freshly painted and able to close, unlike before. And then she set the fresh flowers down on a table, a sign of life and a fresh start from the horrors that had been witnessed inside the house.